Lohani, and I have been involved in the guiding for the last, let me say, in tea company. I was looking after the business of marketing in tea company, what they call Nepal Tea Development Corporation, which still exists even to the present day, but it is owned now by a private individual. By the time I was working, say 30 years ago, it was owned by Nepal government. It was an undertaking of Nepal government, in other words. But subsequently, the whole company was privatized. But they still are running the same brand of tea, the Tokla, you possibly would have seen in the market, presumably. And there are other brands too. And my job was to sell in the domestic market on one hand, in different trade names. And apart from that, I was also exporting tea by myself to European nations, particularly Germany, UK, and of course Ireland. These are the main countries where there is quite a demand of tea. And they have been drinking for the last, should I say, 400 years or 500 years? Because Great Britain is the country, and she may not necessarily produce tea in her own homeland. She instead will be importing tea from all over the world, particularly from China, India, Bangladesh, or you can name even Myanmar, where they produce tea, Malaysia, South American countries, including in Africa, like Kenya, for example. So the best auction center, because tea is sold out through auction market. In UK, in London, there is a biggest auction center where millions of kilograms of tea are disposed of every weekend. So there are buyers in the international community where they all gather in London to buy the tea in the auction market. And the price is interacted or formed, if you like, in the auction market in the UK. And that particular price will be prevailing all over the world thereafter. So my job was to sell the tea and came to understand all about the technicalities of marketing and the price fixing technique in the auction market. That is the subject of my study. I was retired thereafter, and I have taken this job of guiding for the last 20 years. I'm so very glad and delighted to meet you, and most of the faces I see today are well known to me. I can see all the faces because we keep on meeting all over the place, don't we, from time to time. So I was, just day before yesterday, our chairman, Mr. Badri, phoned me to say that, well, we are running a refreshment course here, and he pleaded with me to please take some time for about an hour or so to explain about, not to teach. I'm not coming to teach you, because you are my colleague, I must say, honestly, but to share my experiences with you. And you have been guiding, I have been guiding in the same line, of course, in the same trade, and there is no point that I should be able to teach you. Although I have gathered some knowledge and experience, of course, that I can share with you. And after my deliberation here, I even request you to please put questions to me in relation to many of the day-to-day activities or the hurdles or the problems that you may be facing. I'm facing in the same way too. And this is how we can sort out all the problems that we come across on a daily basis, of course. So now let me open up my paper. I have some of the points I have supposed to discuss today is effective communication skill, preparation and planning of a good commentary. That is what the subject is all about. So in respect to this subject, what can I tell you is this, that tour from the hotel, that is what we do. Say, for example, your guests are based in Yak and Yeti Hotel, and you have a guest numbering about 10 or so. So how do we start off with? According to the norms of guiding, that is what you do, and you presumably may be doing the same thing, I think. That The first thing, you introduce yourself and say all the greetings, the namaskar, whatever you do have to say. And then after you come to the boss, right over the boss, then you start narrating the whole story of your tour for the whole day. That is what you do, don't we? Now we will say that, suppose, for example, we are going to Patan, for example. Then you will tell all about Patan, what is this, all the city is about, what are the historical part of it. That will be explaining in nutshell. When having done that one, then as the boss moves on, then you come very close to the Ghantagara, and you will be mentioning about what this clock tower is all about. And it is better you mention that, well, one of the rulers in Nepal back in 1846 had been to UK for the first time, and he was Janga Bahadur, as you know very well. So he happened to see all the clock tower in UK, in London, and he was quite amazed to see it. And he, on his way back, decided to install one in Kathmandu. So you can impress the guest by saying all that, the kind of experience of our leaders or prime minister who had been to UK. And then similarly, you can also mention about the mosques that you see, the Muslim mosques close by. One is dedicated to Sunnites, other one is the Shiites, very close to Antagara. And you may tell them that, well, it was during the time in 1857, there was a Gadar, perhaps you might have read in the history too, because many Indians rose in rebellion against the British Raj in India. And that is either called mutiny or Gadar. I think you know that. Mutiny. And then after, the many Muslims fled in order to save their life. And Janga Bahadur went himself by the invitation of Britishers, given our strong relationship with Great Britain at that time. And British wanted Nepalese support in terms of curbing the rising kind of a sentiment on the part of the Indians against the British at that time. So the Gorkha troops were sent out in India to crush the uprising of the Indian at that time. And it is also mentioned, how far it is true I don't know though yet, many Indians talk about it. Many British soldiers, Nepalese Gorkha soldiers made a brutalities on the part of the Muslims doing that. And then many Muslims fled. Most of them arrived in Nepal too at that time. But Janga Bahadur was such a good man that he gave a shelter to many of the Muslims who were stationed very close to Ghantagara. You might have come across all those, haven't you? And they are all staying in the mosques there. So this is how we protected Muslims in that territory. You can explain all that about to the guests. That is what I have been doing to myself. And that shows that Hindus in Nepal are very tolerant towards Muslim too. That is the point that we need to raise actually. And as you proceed further, you go to Tudikhel, don't you? And you can mention that Tudikhel is an area where from time to time, during our national day or so, we gather there, followed by many of the dignitaries, the president, the prime minister. Earlier on, the king used to attend that pavilion right in the middle of that Tudikhel to witness all the activities. And at times we ought to have a horse race ceremony too. So this is how we observe many festivals and ceremonies in Tudikhel compound. That is how we keep on explaining about. And you may also mention about the tall tower, what we call Dharahara. That was built in 1850 by Bhimsen Thapa, the Prime Minister. And it is one of the good minarets we have. They call minaret actually. And I'll exactly tell you what I do, actually, you see, and you may perhaps be doing the same thing. And as you keep on proceeding further up towards Patan, as I mentioned to you, then you see from distance, long away, a Singha Darbar, in the Lion's Palace, if you like. And you can mention the Singha Darbar being the one which is of a neoclassical design of the European style, built by Chandra Shamsher, the then Prime Minister, who also visited like Janga Bahadur did to Europe. And I was quite amazed, fascinated to see a Palace of Versailles in France. So this is purely the copy of Palace of Versailles of France. This one is, which contained 1,400 rooms inside it, you see. So the Palace of Versailles in Europe too. So it is basically a copy. And you can mention that too. And there is a chandelier, big banquet hall where most of the dignitaries who visited this country way back in 1961, I still remember Queen Elizabeth visited in 1961. And for the second time, she did visit also in 1972, for 2 times actually. On both occasions, she was being hosted at dinner by His Majesty the King at the time in that a big hall inside the Royal Palace in Singapore. So it is now currently an official building of the government officials, including prime ministers. We also had a parliament house before, but it has shifted now to Baneshwara, hasn't it? So this is how we just keep on explaining about it. And then arriving at very close to Patan, then what I do is this, that you come across the stupa when you take a turn towards the municipality onto the Patan side. Now don't forget to mention about that party. That is very interesting. Because most will know it, who Ashoka was. Ashoka was one illustrious emperor in India. In Pataliputra, it was called, very close to Patna itself. And they had a domain at that time ruled by a great emperor, Ashoka. He came from the Mauryan dynasty. Probably you might have read that history of India as well, I think. And what Ashoka did was, he waged a war against some tribal groups of people in India, killing tens of thousands of them. And after killing so many innocent people, Ashoka simply could not sleep in peace. He started repenting day and night for having committed this kind of a crime. And then he was advised by the then priest, the so-called priest inside the royal palace, that the best way to get rid of the sin which you have committed is to get yourself converted into Buddhism from Hinduism. He was a Hindu ruler before, and subsequently was a convert. He abided by the advices offered by the advisors. And then what he did was, after being a Buddhist guy, he decided to come over to Nepal, because Nepal being the birthplace of Buddha, in Lumbini. And he arrived and then raised a pillar, which you can still see there, raised by him, where he inscribed the wording that the God of compassion we call Lord Buddha was born in this sacred land. That is how we came to know that Buddha was born in our territory rather than in India. And for many, many years it was hidden behind the ground, wasn't it? Because the palace where Suddhodana was living in was dismantled completely by the lightning, by the rain, who knows it, by the vagaries of the nature. And then for many, many years nobody could say for sure as to where Buddha was born. And then much later in 1819, I suppose, in 1890, yes, the then government invited one archaeologist from Germany, Führer was his name. And there was one Indian expert who was also invited to make a research in the whole areas, try to identify the place where Buddha was actually born. And it took almost 6 months for them to figure out as to where the real palace was. And finally, after excavation, they found out the pillars raised by Ashoka into 3 pieces. It was broken out by the lightning, probably, I think. And they joined together in the same place where you can still see in Lumbini, don't you? So this is what the pillar is all about, Ashoka. So the Ashoka thereafter came to Patan, because Patan, it is said to have been the capital of Nepal at that time. In 250 BC we are talking about. It is not in a day or two, actually. In 250 BC, Ashoka arrived in Patan with his daughter, whom he accompanied, and based there in Patan for a couple of years. He succeeded erecting that stupa, which you can see there. There are 4 such stupas in every cardinal direction of Patan. I have seen all of those, though. You might possibly would have seen too, haven't you? So this is the first one, which he built it. And then that is you need to explain about, that it was built by Ashoka, that he was here. And every foreigner will know about Ashoka, because they must have paid a visit to India at one time or other, see. And they were being explained about the contribution made by Ashoka. When he returned, he gave his daughter in marriage to Nepali prince. You know that one, don't you?
Charumati.
Charumati, absolutely he did. So there is a Charumati Bihar in Chava Hill.
She was married to Depal, sir?
She was married to Nepali king.
Called Depal.
Devapala. Absolutely. You are. So she got that stupa built in 250 BC, before Christ. And this is a living example of as to how Ashoka and his family in helping Nepal very much in creating this kind of enormous project, if you like. So Ashoka returned back home, and after returning, what he did was to spread Buddhism in whole Southeast Asia. He sent his uncle to Sri Lanka, and another brother to Thailand, and through the Silk Road, he sent another delegation of people over to China to spread Buddhism there. So all the credit of spreading Buddhism goes in favor of Ashoka. That is what my point is. So you can say that, and thereafter you can go into Patan, and in Patan Darbar Square you naturally will be telling all about the temples that you may come across. Right from the Krishna temple, the illustrious temple, the most significant of all the temples, I would say. It is a marvelous temple. In a way it was built, wasn't it? In the beginning of the 16th century, if you remember. Siddhi Narsingh Malla, he was a great Malla king, of course. There are 3 Malla kings, don't forget it. Siddhi Narsingh Patan, then Bhupendra Malla Bhaktapo, and then again Pratap Malla in Kathmandu. They are the illustrious king who contributed a lot in creating profusion of art and culture in this country. He was very loyal to these 2-3 rulers. And after having done that, you may be going right inside what you call it, Keshav Narayan Chowk. That is what I do mostly. And while being at the Keshav Narayan Chowk, I'll start telling all about the palaces of the Malla era and all the renovation work that has taken place in Patan. Perhaps you know all that about, don't you? After 1934 earthquake, Patan was really in a dilapidated state, really in a volatile stage. And it so happened that in 1899, some 5 Austrians had managed to come over to Calcutta by ship. And their destination was certainly Nepal. That is why they determined to come here. And then they virtually, it is said, travel by overland from Calcutta to Patan, you can imagine. 5 Austrians. You can still see the picture taken by them. Have you come across that picture of the 5 Austrians in the museum? You haven't? How do you forget to look at that one? Because these Austrians had camera with them, because by 1899, the camera was already being invented. So they came with all the cameras, took a lot of shots from every nook and corner in Kathmandu Valley, and this picture was hung in the museum for a certain number of years.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
They took pictures from every corner, they stayed for years and years, and when they were returning back home, they succeeded buying huge quantity of artifacts, statues, because Patan is the home of all these statues, made out of brass, bronze, and copper, and all the rest of it. So they all bought it along with them, you see. 100 years after, the Austrians decided to return those artifacts back to Nepal. But in the meantime, what they did was, since they were donating all of the artifacts which they had purchased, they had every ability and knowledge, to keep it amongst themselves. But they decided to return back to Nepal. But our government picked up a discussion with them why we should keep it. And after prolonged discussion, it was arranged that the Austrians themselves will come to renovate the whole palace premises, and they would put up one by one all of the artifacts there. And now, the museum you see is the contribution made by the Austrians, and we are very proud of the fact. And there is quite a good museum. Most of the visitors I have taken them to, who have visited the museum, really have appreciated.
One of the most amazing art galleries.
Hung there on the wall. One Indian who visited, he was so amazed, he said that I have not seen any museum in India quite like in Patna. So it's the most beautiful of all the museums. Well maintained, well kept, well explained underneath in English, all about different statues, different postures, all have been very well explained. It's a really good idea. Now, that's the museum part, you need to tell that, that's what I do. And after that, other interesting techniques. See, as you keep on talking to the guest in a long lecture, he will be passively listening to you, but he may not necessarily reply back. And you could feel as if whether or not the way I have spoken, have they heard? Have they followed? In order to examine this, you have to initiate that they must also counter back with you see. So in order to do this, there are different techniques I have learned. And that is, why don't you mention about all the big shots who visited in this country at different period of time, like for example, Colonel Jimmy Robert. Have you heard his name?
Yes.
Jimmy Robert?
Yes.
He was the man who was the expert in trekking, in several other tourism activities. And he was also at one time associated with Tiger Mountain Company, wasn't he?
Yes, sir.
So every visitor will know him very well. So you can talk about them too, to the guest. You know about this Jimmy Robert? And similarly, other man is Jim Edward. He was the chief of the mountain travel. And he's more or less kind of a pioneer in trying to open up the whole jungle lodge in Chitwan. The tiger tops. How can you forget that? So it was his creation. In those days, back in 60s up until, I would say what, 2010, Kamalji? Tiger tops did a lot of good job. So many visitors came in to inspect all the animals right inside. They were running so properly well by the guidance of the British. This Jimmy Edward was a British, and he was the sole authority of that organization. But our government, due to some reason, I don't know, there are 7 such lodges inside the park, were all closed down. All closed down. So most of the high-profile tourists, I can tell you, those used to come. And we had elephant polo, run by Jimmy Edward. Do you remember? Jimmy Edward? Is no more now. See, prince and princesses of different countries, including all the high-profile individuals used to come to play that game there. But they are not coming anymore now. It is sad, I must tell you. They should have kept it as it is. That is going out of the picture. And then other thing you tell them about is Edmund Hillary. Who will not forget him? He climbed Everest back in 1952 with the help of the Nepali Sherpa guy.
29th of May 1952.
53, in the month of May, yes.
29th of May.
I still remember. And he used to go to the mountain in order to help the Sherpa community, to build schools and colleges and all the rest of it. He has done a tremendous job up in the Himalaya, and no other foreigners have done as much as he did. So we should never forget him. So we can even mention his name to many of the guests. That's what I do. So in order to exchange our dialogue with the guest, that is what my point is, you see. Otherwise, he will just remain passive. He will not communicate with you. So the topics, all these individuals from that perspective. But you can, even those who speak Italian languages or other languages, you can even mention all these. They all know it. Who will not know Edmund Hillary? Everybody knows it. So that you can cover up that part of the story too. And then other thing you can talk about is Tony Hagen. You never miss it. Everybody knows Tony Hagen. Elizabeth Holly. How many of you have an idea about Elizabeth Holly?
Yeah.
She is a lady who has given an impression about Nepal to most of the people in the United States. Without her, not many Americans would have known about it. She was an editor, a correspondent. She was dispatching all the newsletters to USA about Nepal. There is such a god-like individual we have seen in this country, all the foreigners. She passed away a few years ago.
Especially about climbing, right?
Sorry?
Especially
About climbing part.
climbing.
She was mostly on the climbing part.
All the climbers used to register.
To mention the name of all the foreigners, and then only they will be interested to listen to you. That is what my point is, you see. If you just keep on talking about the temple, this was built this time, the mullah built it, they are not interested in that man. But my point is, as a rule, as a guide, you certainly have to mention all about the history and rest of it, in nutshell. But in detail, you have to mention all these individuals. Then only they start listening to you about. And other thing I want to show you is, this is on the basis of my past experiences. I have brought certain books here. You have to refer these books to the guest, because most of them would have read these books. And if you show your ignorance about the events of the books, then you may not impress them very much. In order to be able to derive more benefit, you understand what I'm trying to say? If you want to derive more benefit, at the conclusion of a tour, we just talk about this part of it, then he will see you as a man who has read everything, and he's knowledgeable, he's understandable, and accordingly, you will be highly rated. That is what my point is. Now look at these books. I'm going to tell you all about this one by one. It was in 1950, for the first time, Annapurna 1, which is 8,091 meters high, was scaled by this gentleman, is Maurice Herzog. Who will forget his name? Everyone in the world, in European nations and America, will know him. Maurice Herzog. Can you imagine, back in 1950, without any modern gear, as we call it, he climbed without even oxygen. But the poor guy, as he was returning back, he fell into avalanche and was swept away, and he was dangling on the basis of a rope for about 10 hours. And finally, his inmate went and then released him from the rope. But when he was taken to the hospital, he lost all the fingers because of the frostbite. See, he was a great man, this Maurice Herzog. He wrote this book. See, for the first time in 1951, when he published this book, 40,000 copies were sold out in a couple of hours. Read this book. I have read this one, Maurice Herzog, in 1950. He's the first climber. But before him, in 1924, two British gentlemen tried to go to scale Mount Everest.
George Mullery and
Arvin. These two gentlemen. Oh, you know him. So there is a book about these two guys. But they were too lost. And nobody knows yet whether they were actually able to scale the Everest or they didn't do that. It's not known yet. But there's a lot of presumption in the world that possibly they might have gone to the summit of the Everest. Mr. Mallory and Arvin, there are two guys.
but
So
he
this
lost
is
his life on the way, sir. He died on the way.
He died on the way.
Their dead body was recovered.
Recovered, right. In course of time, back in
20 years later.
2002, come on. In 2002, they sent a delegation to figure out whether they could find the dead body of the two guys there up in the mountain.
Yes,
They
sir.
actually found out Mallory.
Mallory is a camera.
Still on sort of camera because
There is still a sort of camera. They have not found yet. True, they certainly found out the dead body of Mallory, but couldn't find out the camera yet.
Camera as well also.
Camera was certain hidden inside the snow. Who knows actually? But these two were quite great men. Everyone will know them very much. So you have to mention the name of these two too. And they have made a film about Mr. Mallory and Arvin too. So you keep in mind this fact. And the second is,
So what was the name of the movie that was?
as you know very well, when they come over to Nepal, they talk about Tibet and the Tibetan people. We cannot ignore them. Particularly Americans are so interested to know about Tibetan people. And then, if you have read this book, you can narrate the whole story about Tibet perfectly well. This is the autobiography of Dalai Lama. Freedom in Exile. Please read this book. Freedom in Exile.
But if you are taking Chinese group, and
May not have read this book, I would say.
into the theory, it's very popular.
It was in 1996, there was a disaster in Mount Everest. There are hundreds and hundreds of foreigners going to climb Mount Everest. They represented from about 50 different countries. Even from Australia, Europe,
US.
and then Africa. Do you remember Africa? There are Africans too.
I don't know.
And at that time, how many of you have known about it? There are two internationally reputed guides. Two of them were based in Kathmandu in Tamil. There is a hotel called Garuda Hotel,
Next to Kathmandu Guest House.
next to Kathmandu Guest House. They are based there, and their job was to take their clients with the assurances that in the event they pay about, say, 10,000 US dollars for one individual.
One is blind. Yeah.
Sorry? One was blind.
Blind person.
One was not blind person.
Right
No.
now.
He was not
They are
blind.
gamer.
On their office also. Rob Hall was a New Zealander. He was also internationally reputed guide by the name of Rob Hall. And other one is Scott Fisher, an American gentleman, very tall. I had seen him with a robust health. And in 1996, Rob Hall has 12 clients, and Scott Fisher had about 15 clients. And they were trying to take them all to the Everest. Apart from that, there are other individuals from different countries that are trying to go to the Everest. But what happened was, the weather was good in the beginning, as they crossed over the level 1 to level 2, the level 3, onto the level 4, when they were climbing up, such a strong wind started blowing about, and it became totally in darkness. So they lost the way up to the Everest. And Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, the two internationally reputed guys, had gone to not to the summit, a little below the summit, awaiting their clients to come up. But in the darkness, they lost the way, and then 8 such clients lost their life immediately. And Rob Hall, at that point in time, had his wife pregnant back home in New Zealand, and he makes a phone call, because in 1996 they already had developed all the phone, international satellite phone. He made a phone call saying to his wife, "Darling, I'm sorry indeed, I'm not going to make it today. I may possibly be dying." And she shouted from another side saying, "What on earth you are trying to say? You better return. Don't you know that you have a baby in my belly? She's going to take birth in a few months' time from now." "No, I'm crazy. Give my love to my baby. I'm sorry, my clients are still at the backside of it. Neither I can go out to the summit, nor return back to fetch my client back to the Everest. So my days are over." So he passed away. Both of them died, Scott Fisher and Rob Hall. And there is a book now here. Is all the story about?
Yeah,
And in the meantime, what happened was, the writer of this book, the Krakauer, that's what his name is, John Krakauer, look at the name. There is an outside magazine that is published in New York. Highly reputed magazine. Everybody knows.
He was an auditor of that magazine, sir.
Edmund Hillary keep on telling the world that Mount Everest must be given rest, almost for about 2 years, 3 years, within which time all the garbages that Mount Everest has collected, because people are reckless in throwing all the bottles, all the plastic bag, what have you. So they must clean it up in order to let the whole area rejuvenate. So we must give such a time to do so. But the Nepalese government is not listening. They are simply trying to make money out of it. So how far it is true? Whether it is a garbage or it is just a good road to good kind of pathways to go up to the Everest. So you better go and check it out. And if you like, you can also climb if you can do it. So he was given all the money and everything, but he signed with Scott Fisher, the international deputed guide, as I mentioned to you, remember? So he signed with him, but this is a very clever man. Under the circumstances, when there's such a darkness, when the situation was so grave, he made it by climbing onto the top. He took few shots of the pictures from every corner and quickly returned back to the safe place. And then he saw all the dying men and women all the way down. So all this story, as he saw in the course of the climbing, has all been reported in this book, fabulous book, written by one Russian guide who was there at the time too. That is also equally famous.
The climb.
The Climb, true. Oh, you have read that. The Climb is
And
good.
I haven't read that
one
one.
question.
I've read this one.
So that man, he was himself a climber, but he lost his fingers and everything. And he was totally in a bad shape, but somebody came and make him survive. And then once he returned back to America, 1 year after, he was in the deathbed and he wrote that book, One Day to Die For, in the Everest at that time. So there are such a funny stories.
There is also humor.
Well, it is unimaginable. She also wanted to go to the Everest for fun, but she was not that physically fit to do so. So one Sherpa gave a helping hand. If you just ride over my soldier, I will take you to the Everest. And she did it. And then there are a lot of stories, funny stories about the Sherpa had a very nice time with a lady, actually.
And a night.
You can find all this in this book. You can find it all that. But she made it, and there is a lot of controversy in New York all about that lady too, actually. It's all being reported in this book. So, this is the one, and then the other one is, see, who will not know this man called Reynold Messner? Do you know him?
Italian.
He's an Italian climber,
First,
and he wrote this book. He's a writer too.
on the 8,000 meter.
And he climbed all the 8,000 meters high mountain without oxygen.
All 14 8,000.
All 14 peaks for that matter, too. So, you are such a reputed man, you are the phenomenal guy who have climbed all the 14 peaks without oxygen. And you are here, and I'm lucky enough to meet you. And then we talk all the way up to Tamil, and he was a very, very nice man. He has written 5 books. One is this, about Yeti. The question whether Yeti exists or not is a major question confronting the world even today. So Messner went to find it out. It was a solo job. He went all over the Himalaya, tried to find out. But ultimately, he saw so many imprints and rest of it, but never a Yeti.
I think he
How many have read this book? Oh, you have. Thank you. You better mention this to every individual, to every guest. I have seen this man. He died about 15 years ago. And he's the man to name Yak and Yeti, the hotel.
is Boris.
He's Bishop Boris Ivanovich. He's a Russian man who, after Russian Revolution, arrived in UK, and he was a ballet dancer too. He was a cook in the meantime. So he performed all the ballet dancing in London and France for many, many years. Then after he decided to come over to Calcutta, where he opened up a 300 club by the name of 300 Club, where in 1951, Tribhuwana, the king, met him. Luckily, as he was used to go to for drinks and for fun into his club. And then Tribhuwana found out that, well, this is such a wonderful man, where every knowledge of dancing, cooking, and all the rest of it. So the king Tribhuwana invited him to come over to Kathmandu. I will give you one kind of a classical type of a building for you to run a hotel. So he was interested. He came in along with the king. And so the Bahadur Bhavana, where we have an election office, that was run by this man, Mr. Boris from Russia, to start his hotel by the name of Royal Hotel for many years. So the coronation of Mahendra, the king, was organized by Mr. Boris Lizanovich in that hotel at that time. So many dignitaries were invited. See, it was all done by him. But Boris has 4 sons. One son has opened one restaurant in Tamil for some time. Alexander was his name. But both of them died. Alexander died too. Boris died in the meantime. Iyengar, his wife, was living in Kathmandu. She was running a farm, a poultry farm, and she was not doing well too. And I don't know for the last 5 years whether she's here or she passed away too. I don't know. But this is a fabulous book. You must have time to read this, and you better tell the group all about it. He is the promoter of Nepali tourism.
But this person is also
Sorry?
known for stealing lots of idols from Nepal. Yes. He made channel with.
I have to disagree with you, sir.
I know well.
See, listen, I constructed huge mahala, palace in European countries, but he was completely bankrupt. And all of his 4 sons became bankrupt. So I never agree on this point that Boris earned money. Never say that. It will be complete injustice to say that.
I heard that.
Which of the foreigners who visited Nepal have contributed to Nepal in terms of promoting the tourism industry in this country? This book was published about a year and a half ago, and this man, Mr. Mark Lichty, he came as a boy back in 1960s, and he was so very well attracted to this country that he determined that he will keep on coming practically every year. And he started coming, learning all about the life of Nepalese people, and finally succeeded writing this wonderful, wonderful book, which I read very recently. Far out, we never miss this.
Yeah.
Because couple is the center of Buddhist learning. Who started this couple?
Dalai Lama sect, Gelugpa, I don't know.
It's a Gelugpa sect
Gelugpa sect.
that they carry on with.
It's also a meditation center. Their own meditation.
It was in 1974 that one lady came from USA, and her name was Gina Zakevsky. She was also a Russian lady, but was born in USA instead. Her parents came after the Russian Revolution and succeeded coming to a tin cell town. How many of you know the tin cell town? Where the Hollywood is. And she was born there. She was quite smart, very good looking. I have seen her myself. And with a blonde hair. She acted in the Hollywood for about 15 years or so. And after acting in the Hollywood, she determined to leave this country because she has enough of money she earned, enough of pleasures, merrymakings, all kinds of things. She was fed up with that kind of a materialistic life she was leading on, and was determined to go into Tibet, where she may quietly sit down and learn about Tibetan Buddhism, meditation, the art of living, and all the rest of it. And then, luckily, she read one book advised by some of her friends. And the title of the book, I didn't bring the one out here though, but you can go through that book too. The Way of the White Clouds. That was written by one German Lama who was living there in Tibet for the last 30 years. So he became a monk. So he read he wrote
Way
that
of
book,
White Cloud.
The Way of the White Clouds.
The way of the white
So-
cloud.
This Gina was fascinated to read that book, and thereupon decided to go to Tibet. But you can remember, back in 1974, Tibet was a forbidden city by China. Nobody was allowed to go into Tibet by the Chinese. And what she could do? She landed here in Bodhanath instead. And in Bodhanath, she met one Lama called Yeshe. Thupchen Yeshe. Thupchen Yeshe. He was a Rinpoche, and he was a great instructor. And Gina met him, and both of them decided to meditate, to go for retreat, and all the rest of it. Because Gina was very wealthy, she then bought that part of the land in Kappan that was owned by my grandfather. And I have lived there in Kappan for 2 years at that time. There is a good bungalow in those days, back in 1960, actually. And then they put up that monastery with the help of the money from Gina. And Gina, she was really in a desperate condition because she had too much of fun back in America. And Lama Yeshe told her that the only way for you to return back to your normal life would be to meditate for about a year and a half in the cave of Mount Everest. That is what he said. And she abided by, immediately sent over to the basement of the Mount Everest, where she meditated for 6 months, and said she developed a kind of a lungs problem. Passed away. She died. After her death, they say there is one incarnation of this Gina, born in America somewhere. That's what they say. But in respect of Lama Yeshe, who was by then had become very popular amongst many Americans, and he was invited to California. He went there to teach many Americans about Tibetan Buddhism. And in about 1 year or so, he died of cardiac arrest. In order to revive him, most Americans, as they were wealthy enough, to take him to the best hospital in the world that is based in Texas, Cedar Sinai. How many of you know this Cedar Sinai? That is the best hospital in the world, you see, to revive him, to bring him to life. But they could not do anything. He died too, Lama Yeshe. 18 months after, this Lama Yeshe was born where, you know? Because they are a Tulku, they are Rinpoche, they take birth after. Not in America, neither in Nepal, neither in Tibet, but in Madrid, in Spain. And there is the boy.
This was not recognized.
As I heard, there are some groups of people in Kappan who, being installed for a certain number of years, they came to the conclusion that why can we install a foreigner into our monastery? This is not the right thing to do. So they wiped him out. So he's no more the chief of that Kappan monastery these days.
Yes.
You raised that question, thank you very much. But he was the chief at the time. So based on the whole story, one British lady came in to learn about Tibetan Buddhism at that point in time. Her name was P.K. Mackenzie, the writer. And she wrote this book, Reincarnation, the Boy Lama. Don't forget this book. You mentioned about this to many of the guests. Kappan has become the center of Buddhist learning. So many Westerners come there. You may not know it though. They may not even tell you. But you have to tell them all about the Kappan monastery and the reincarnation concept and the Boy Lama. To do it. The other book I want to introduce you is that you keep on mentioning this to your guest actually. All of them want to know about Tibet, no matter what they are in Nepal, but they want to talk about Tibet. Look at the funny thing these days. And you're going to avoid it. Have you been experiencing this kind of a confrontation with the many guests?
Yeah.
You may
Yes,
come on
yes.
this, don't you? They all raise questions about Tibet.
Yes, sir.
See, one thing I want to tell you, it was about 4 years ago, 13 highly profile people came here. US Embassy made a phone call to me. Come on, Surendra, you need to go to Bodhanath tomorrow at 6:30 in the morning. You stand up in the gate, and there are the dignitaries coming in. You have to give a tour for about 1 hour and a half. Excuse me. I agreed. But I didn't venture to ask who the guests are. But they told they are high-profile guests. We are not going to name them, but be ready at the gate itself. There are 2 other American ladies who may come to help you out. And then I took a full suit dress with a tie, necktie and all of it. And I was standing there at the gate. 2 ladies from US Embassy came in and they told me, come on Surendra, what you need to do is to take all the group of the circumambulation of the Holy Stupa. And by then you just keep on telling them all the story about Bodhanath, how it came, all about it, what the religious significance of that stupa. And then you take it to the monastery, in the monastery, and to tell about the story of the monastery too. So there are 2 things I was instructed to do. One is about the stupa's story, other one is about the monastery. And then I was waiting there. They didn't even tell me the name of those guys. All the policemen came in with a siren, start buzzing about, and they cordoned off the whole area. Not a single pedestrians were allowed to stay there. And there comes the car, and the group steps down, and there's a lady whom I easily recognize because I keep on watching CNN.
Clinton.
Not Hillary Clinton. Nancy Pelosi.
Pelosi already visited here.
Nancy Pelosi. Hello, Surendra. Your Excellency, I'm really grateful. I have met such a wonderful lady.
How long ago, sir? How long ago?
4 years ago. And there are 12 along with them.
She is still speaker.
Sorry?
She was still speaker at that
She is still the speaker. She went to the present, she is a speaker. High profile lady in USA who has every ability to knock down the president of USA. So I shook hand, and it is my great privilege, Your Excellency, to say something about the stupa. So should I begin it? Yes, carry on with, she said. And he started telling all the story. And then after, she said, one thing, there is one point lurking in my mind. Would you please answer? If you could, she asked me. Yes, please. See, I have come to know that in your country, there are a lot of Tibetan people living in this area in Bodhanath. But Nepalese as such, including your government, is not taking much care to these Tibetan people. They're harassed and they have not been provided home, and neither being they're allowed to go to their monastery. They are really in a very wretched condition. Is that right? Your Excellency, I apologize with you that I completely disagree on this point. I'm sorry indeed, because Nepal, as you know, is quite an impoverished country. And for such a country, we have taken care of almost 70,000 Tibetan refugees to the present day, right from 1959, when they all descended down from the Himalayas in the quest of peace, because they are all being harassed, tortured. Even their houses were burned down by the invading Chinese. That we have taken them as granted by saying that they're almost like an envoy of God. So we have got to look after. I was just a small boy at that time. I could see so many Tibetan needy people. They were very, very hungry indeed. Arrived in Kathmandu Valley. And I asked my question to my father at that time. I said, why there are here so many of the Tibetans? And my father told me all the story, how they were being harassed by the Chinese. And they were forced to come over to this country. But Dalai Lama didn't come over because he was a bit afraid of Nepalese king and the country, saying that, well, given the strong ties with China, who knows, in course of time, the Nepalese government may hand over in the hands of the Chinese. So he may possibly not be safe in Nepal. So he decided to go over to India, where he was well received by Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister, into Dharmasala, where he is even to the present day living comfortably well, actually. And then we have been looking after Your Excellency. Very well. Look at the shops. They all belong to the Tibetan people. Even the houses. In course of time, they succeeded buying all the houses from the Nepalese people. And look at the monastery they have built. In my childhood days, Your Excellency, right across the houses you see, you could see all farmland. There was not a single house before the Tibetan came. And when the Tibetan came, our government allocated the whole area of Bodhanath in order for them to stay here comfortably. And if they wish, they could even build monasteries after monasteries, which they have done over this period of time.
And the rock factory as well in Dalai.
The rock factory. And they have been running all the rock factory. They have been selling all these to the international community. So from that point of view, it is a justifiable work the Nepalese people have done so far. If you don't mind, Your Excellency, that is what my observation is all about. Oh, do you think so? Do you think so? Just what you thought?
Beautiful
Yeah,
answers.
previous election, in your answer.
क्लास सक्यो
But